we've got an R dominant allele, an R allele for flower color that's dominant and it produces redness, and a little r that is recessive and it doesn't produce redness, so it produces white, which is essentially the lack of red pigmentation. Again, if you have one copy of the big R or two copies, you still get the same redness. So, So another example is codominance, where essentially the effects of, in this case, the big R allele is additive. So if you have one R, you get some redness, and it makes pink. If you have two R's, it's making twice as much of that green product, and you're getting all the way to red. So there are plenty of genes where we see this additive effect, or in other genes where we see this dominance effect. And then there are, of course, others as well. And we'll talk about some of those today. So, a bunch of definitions that we need to make sure we have straight in our heads. So an allele is just a different form of the gene. So here we're denoting the genes with either big R or little r. And the big R is one allele, and the little r is another allele for that particular gene. And what else? So if you're homozygous, then that means that you have two copies. The two copies that you have are the same. Homo means the same. Heterozygous means that they're different, so that means you have different alleles per gene. So which ones of these are heterozygous? The pink one is heterozygous, that's right. And this one's also heterozygous. And the other four are all homozygous. And then dominant, recessive, and codominant. So a dominant allele is an allele that can be expressed whether there's one copy or two copies. Recessive allele is only expressed when it's homozygous recessive. So it's homozygous recessive. And codominance is when they each express themselves, and when you have both copies or a copy of each one, you wind up with something that's and basically what Darwin was understanding the mechanics of it, but he was thinking that basically this blending is what we've always got. Questions? Okay. So now we're still thinking like mental here, and we're thinking about what happens when you mate individual organisms. And this thing called the Punnett square, I know you have all done this, but again, bear with us. So here we've got, you can use it to calculate the expected proportions of genotypes and phenotypes if you're mating a couple of different strains that are that have known genotype, right? So here we've got males. They both have the same genotype right here, right? So we've got big B, little b, big B, little b, and basically by setting up a table like this and having the rows and columns intersect each other, you're basically filling in a big B here, which goes here and here, in the position, and then little b goes here, second position, and the same thing here, the big B here and then here, little b is here. So you're basically adding up the intersections of those rows and columns, and by doing this, you can figure out that if you have this one genotype right here, the big little b, and you're crossing it against itself, you're going to wind up with 1/4 of them. 1/4 of the square is big B, 1/4 is little b, and then half of it, because there are 2 quarters, are going to be big B, little b. Right? Okay. Now, just a brief little detour here to talk about crossing over recombination during meiosis. So, in meiosis, when we're producing gametes, if we have a pair of chromosomes here, they are going to duplicate themselves here. Right? So now we have a duplicated chromosome, and then they're going to cross over, which means that basically a chunk of one chromosome is going to get switched to another chromosome, homologous chromosome. So here we have AB little a, little b, and big A, big B. After crossing over, we wind up with 4 different combinations. I'm sorry, let me go back. On this part of the chromosome, we have the A locus and the B locus, and down here we have a C locus. Okay? So crossing over happens in between the C locus and the A and B loci, and that means that the C gets switched. So instead of having a big C here, you wind up with a little c, a big C comes over here. And now, when we had only 2 different genotypes here, right? We've got, at least in the haploid state, we've got all big versus all little. Now we have potential gametes that are all little, all big, plus the 2 little, A, B, and the big C, and the big A, B, and the little C. So you wind up with more possible combinations of things. And an important point here is that if there's a continuum between the likelihood of crossing over, so if you have 2 genes that are right next to each other, right here, then the likelihood of crossing over between them is very low, and therefore they're always going to show up together. If you have genes that are very far apart, then the possibility of a crossing over event between them is quite high, and it's, even though they occur on the same chromosome, it's going to look like they are on different chromosomes. So it's going to look like basically what Mendel said. So these could look like, so C versus A or versus B, it could look like they're going to support, they're going to sort independently. So, coming back to the Punnett square, so we can do the Punnett square for a single characteristic. We can also do it for 2 characteristics. So here we have pod color on Mendel's P's and also P color, right? And again, we're looking at these are both heterozygous for both characters, okay? And this is the F1 generation. So let's see, if that's the F1 generation, and so from looking at this, can you tell me if these traits are, if these genes are dominant or codominant? So in this case, they're both regular dominant, just like Mendel was working with this flower. And the way that we can see this is because if we look at the ratios of our offspring, let's look only at the green. So the green would be like the flower color and the star. So the green pod color is giving us what proportion, so don't look at the P color, all right? Let's look at the pod color. And tell me what proportion of the offspring are green versus which proportion are yellow. More or green? How many? That's right, 3/4 of them are green, and then 1/4 of them are yellow. So that's right, it means that it's dominant. And you can see that if you look carefully. You can see that for all, if you look across this row, if you look across here, you can see that they're either big G or big G little g. And the only place that we find the yellow pods are the little g little g. Right? That's right. It's an absolute green in this space here. Okay. So the upside is, if you're breeding heterozygotes or F1 generation with 2 different characteristics, you wind up with more combinations of potential offspring, right? We should have. We've got just one case where we have both recessives are being expressed for homozygous recessive, right here. So you get the green T and the yellow R. And of course, you can expand this and look at Another example of this discrete character here is the spiral direction of this cushion plant or whatever it is, feature. But basically this one is spiraling clockwise and this one is spiraling counterclockwise. And that's a discrete rate. There's nothing in between. I guess you could have some that were spiraling at faster or slower rates, but in this case that's not the case. It's just left-handed versus right-handed. In contrast, human skin color is a gradient. So it's a continuous trait and is controlled by many genes. Another example of a discrete characteristic, in this case by a dominant allele, brachiodactyly, which is a shortening of the digits of the fingers. And so basically, if you have just one copy of the big B, you wind up with brachiodactyly. So in this case, the more common characteristic is the recessive characteristic. And this is just to point out, importantly, that we often think that the dominant genotype, or the dominant allele rather, is more common, and that's certainly not the case. This is a very rare condition, but it is in fact the dominant allele that causes it. Okay, now what we've done so far is we've considered what happens when you cross two individuals, right? Or two, when you cross two individuals, you get certain proportions of offspring from them, right? So if you have, if you were to cross this big B, a big B, little b rather, against another heterozygous, and you cross those two individuals over and over and over again, you wind up with a quarter with normal fingers and 3/4 with brachiodactyly. Okay? Now, that's at the individual level. We also need to be able to think about this at the population level. And at the population level, let's compare them. So basically, again, at the individual level, we're just applying this Punnett square, and we're seeing that we're winding up with a 1:2 to 1 ratio. Whereas at the population level, what we want to know is, at this population level, what's going to happen in the next generation at a bigger scale, and there's more possibilities. So, from the population perspective, we can think about a parental generation here, and it's just whatever collection of genotypes we have. There is some proportion of different genotypes in it, right? So there are 6 different genotypes in here. 1/6 of them are homozygous recessive. Well, we don't know that it's recessive. Are A2, homozygous for A2. 1/3 of them is homozygous for A1, and it looks like half of them are heterozygous. So they have one of each. So what we can expect is that at the population level, assuming a bunch of assumptions that we'll get to in a minute, if we assume that these organisms all have the same probability of reproduction, and that they can mate with any which way, then you can simply take these gametes, throw them into a pot, randomly select them back out, and you can get some expected proportion of offspring in the next generation of genotypes, right? So take all those gametes, all these genotypes, separate them into the gametes, pluck them out a pair at a time, right? And you can get this offspring generation. So a slightly more concrete example, consider chickens and chicks more concrete. You can think of a population of chicken with all of these different genotype frequencies here, and the genotypes are shown here. So in this case, we have names from them at random, plop them in here. If that's true, you should have a 50-50 balance of A1 alleles and A2 alleles. If you then draw out pairs of them randomly, you should get back exactly what you put in. So, in other words, you should have, in this case, 25% A1A1, 25% A2A2, and 50% heterozygotes. Do you have questions about this? We're going to go over it more. That's right. It assumes, in this case, it assumes party-line equilibrium, which we'll talk about. And there are a bunch of ways that can be violated. But essentially what it means is that given some parental population, then we have all of these alleles that make it up have an equal probability of making another offspring, then the frequencies of the genotypes and of the alleles themselves, they shouldn't change from generation to generation. Okay, so what is Hardy-Weinberg? So it's basically this null log that describes what we just talked about. And basically, if there's no evolution going on within a population, then your genotype and allele frequencies should remain constant over time. And they should reflect a particular relationship between allele and genotype frequencies. So there are 5 assumptions, and they are, first of all, there's no natural selection happening. In other words, there are no genotypes that have a higher probability of passing their, a higher probability of having offspring compared to other genotypes. So equivalent statements with all genotypes. Random mating is simply that individuals do not preferentially mate with similar or dissimilar individuals. Again, when mates are basically being pulled from random from that population pool. There's no mutation. In other words, there are no A3s coming into the population, and there's no possibility for an A1 to accidentally become an A2 or vice versa. There's no migration. So there are no individuals coming into the population or being removed from the population. And there's no genetic drift. And no genetic drift is another way of saying, for our purposes, that the population is infinitely huge. Because if you have a small population, then simply by randomly drawing out those alleles from the mating events, you can, the proportion of alleles can change simply due to chance. Okay. So in this case, it means that your actual frequencies of alleles and genotypes are exactly what you would expect from crossbreeding. Okay. So now, our next question is a population actually in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, and how can you figure this out? So again, we're back to the situation here. We have some pool of parents. We can figure out what the gamete pool should be. Basically, you can simply imagine the coupling each of these genes here, plopping them in the pool. So this A2 might be that one, and this A1 might be that one. So they all get disaggregated and stuffed into a big pool. Draw them out randomly with replacement an infinite number of times, and then this is the proportion that you should get in the optimum pool. It should be the same as what we started with. And in the example it is, which is good. Yes. Now, so how do we do this in practice? So we use those observed genotype frequencies to calculate the allele frequencies. We then can use these allele frequencies to calculate the expected Hardy-Weinberg frequencies in the next generation. And then we can simply observe what we calculated for our expected with the observed frequencies in the population. And we're going to work through this. So, you might want to get out a pencil and paper if you don't have them already. So we can look at observed genotype frequencies. So here we have the frequency of our 3 different genotypes. So there's a typo in it. That's annoying. But so this should be A2, A2 here. Not A1, A1. But A2, A2. So homozygous for A1, homozygous for A2, and heterozygous. So one of each. Okay, so those are our observed genotype frequencies in the population. We can then calculate allele frequencies for them. So here we have them. Here's how you calculate them. You should maybe consider doing this in some other ways, but the So what do we do? To get P, so P is usually referred to A1 or to the dominant, the frequency of the dominant allele, always often. So to get P, which is that frequency, you can simply add up the frequency of the A1 plus half of the frequency of the heterozygous. Okay, so what's the frequency of A1?
2.4.
Anyone? Here. 0.59, thank you, great. And what's half of the frequency of A1, A2? 0.08. What happens when you add them together? 0.67, right. So, what proportion is P? It's about 2/3, right? Okay. You can write it as 2/3 if you want, make it easier. The same thing for Q. So for Q, what do we have? We've got 0.25 plus half of 0.16, which is 0.08. Which is 0.533, right? Now, importantly, these frequencies, what do they sum to? They sum to 1. That's right, because these are all of the possibilities in the population. There are no other possibilities. All of the individuals are either A1, A1, A2, or A1. This is A2, A2. A2, A2, remember, that's a typo. A2, A2 is 0.25. But in any case, they have to sum up to 1. It's the population. You want to know what's the frequency in the whole population. Okay, now that we've done that, how then can we figure out what our expected genotype frequencies are? Do we know? Anyone? Well, let's think about it. If we have this pool of allele frequencies, and we're talking about random mating, we're going to pull 2 alleles out of that pool, what's the likelihood that we pull out a A1 on the first try? It's right, it's 2 and 3. That's right. What's the probability that we pull an A1 out on the second try? It's the same. So what's the probability that we get P squared? What's the probability that we get 2 of them, right? So the probability of the first one has got to be 2/3, right? And the probability of the second one is 2/3, right? Which are both 0.67, right? Which means that our probability of getting 2 of those A1 alleles has got to be 4/9, which is what? 0.45. Okay. And so that's our expected frequency for A1, A1. Our expected frequency for A2, A2, right? So this is our our expected frequency of A1, A1. Just put a little star there. Okay, expected. So our expected frequency of A2, which would be Q squared, would be what? What's Q? What's the population frequency of the A2 allele? 0.33, which we can turn into fractions easily, right? So it's a third squared, right? We're gonna have to pull it out twice. So 1 over 9, that is around 0.11, right? And as long as we're here, what's our expected frequency of A1, A2? So let's think about it. We're dipping out of that pool, right? We have that allele pool or gaming pool. We're going to pull out one. How do we get this? We got to pull out A1 and then an A2, right? So the probability of an A1 is what? 2/3, yep. And the probability of an A2 is what? 1/3. So the probability that we get A1 and then A2 is what? Is 2 over 9. That's right. But is that the actual probability of this genotype? It isn't, because there's one other way you can get that genotype, right? You can draw A1 and then A2, or you can draw A2 and then A1, right? So it's really this plus 1/3 times 2/3, and that is 4 over 9. Is that right? 2pq. Right, so this is equal to 2, and that's equal to, you already figured it out, so 4, 5. Okay, are you with me? Hey, it works out. Okay. So yeah, so we wind up with these values here, a little rounding error here, but basically they need to sum up to what again? 100 or 100% or 1.00. Correct. Okay, cool. So that's what we need to do. So if we do this, then what? Here's the question. Are we in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? In this case?
Yes.
What is Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? It's when your expected genotype frequencies match your observed genotype frequencies. So, we're not, are we? There's something fishy going on. And so this is an awesome evolutionary tool. If there's something fishy going on, you can figure out what the fishy thing is. Right? For some reason, we expect this, but we're getting this, right? So in this case, we have what? I'm sorry, we expect this, and we're getting this. So we're getting a lot fewer heterozygotes. We're getting fewer, this is what we're getting. We're getting fewer heterozygotes, we're getting more homozygotes, and more homozygotes, right? So for some reason, these heterozygotes are less abundant in the observed population than would be expected to be a chance. Okay? All right. So, heck, we can do this again. Why not? So let's see. What do we have? We have some observed genotype frequencies right here. So let's take a minute and calculate some expected, some observed allele frequencies.